The Beginning, Part 1. A risen Exo stood, dazed, in the middle of what looked like a giant library. He'd never been here before. As far as he could remember, he'd never been anywhere before. He couldn't remember anything. And all he had to go on was the name given to him by a strange silver drone. A name he didn't even recognize. Fellwinter. All around him were giant, gilded shelves, half of them broken, littered with tattered books and cracked cylindrical cases. He stepped on a book and broke its spine as he walked. The little drone followed him. "I know you don't trust me," it said. "But you have no choice. Who else have you got?" "I don't know," Fellwinter said. He thought for a second. "I don't know anything." "Exactly. So you should listen to me." The soaring height of the ceilings made the building feel like an open space. Remnants of an old fresco loomed over his head, cracked and faded. Maybe it was beautiful once. Fellwinter trudged through the empty fog of his memory, trying to understand how he got there. "You're stubborn, obviously. But if we stay here long enough, you're gonna die." Fellwinter tried to tune out the little drone's voice. He needed to think. He picked his way through the ocean of books, but stopped dead when an explosion rocked the building. He looked up. Dust fell from the faded ceiling in clouds. "See?" the drone said. "This is what I mean. We have to go. A place like this isn't safe." Beside them, a computer terminal, one that looked broken beyond repair, flickered to life. The building showed it again. A warbling female voice came on over a PA system, crackling and distant. Then, a reassuring male voice, smooth but made eerie by the warped quality of the recording. "All library patrons, please report to the nearest emergency station. If you require assistance, an attendant can help you at the reception desk." The recording cut off, and the building shook again. Metal shutters began to descend over the windows, groaning from age and disuse. Something big hit the building, and debris showered down over them. "We should hide," the drone said, and Fellwinter had no choice but to agree. They fled the library. Outside, crouched in the rubble of another building, they watched together as the library was crushed under a torrent of what looked to Fellwinter like falling stars. "See?" the drone said. The Beginning, Part 2. Fellwinter and the drone travelled for 3 days. They saw nothing and no one. On the third night, still walking, Fellwinter looked up and saw meteors like streamers against the night sky. He was struck by the sight, and then by one meteor in particular. Blazing, orange, getting bigger and bigger in the sky. "Run!" the drone said. The first meteor hit the ground behind them. Not a meteor at all, Fellwinter realised when he looked back, but something metal, man-made. The second hit its target. He died. 6 deaths later, crawling out from under metal wreckage, losing pieces of himself, clawing, running, they finally managed to find shelter in a cave. "No," Fellwinter said, as if he was swallowing all of his words and choking on them. "I can't fix you," the drone said after scanning him. "That last hit corrupted protected processes in your cognition modules." "No," the drone spun uneasily. "You're an exo. Exos were made in the Golden Age with proprietary tech. I can't hack into your head to fix the damage, but I can rebuild you as you were. If you shot yourself, I could work quicker." He did. When the drone resurrected him, Fellwinter crumpled to his knees. He sat down and put his head in his hands. "Why is this happening?" he asked. He looked at the drone, trying to read its body language. "Because of you? It's after you, isn't it?" "No," the drone said. "I don't know why." Then it gentled its voice. "The Traveler told me to save you. That something was different about you." "That ball in the sky you showed me? It talked to you?" "I can't explain it." Fellwinter grunted and held his head again. His body ached with the memory of 7 deaths, though he knew that was impossible. "Can you explain anything?" "Not really." They sat in silence for a while. Eventually, the drone spoke up. "We shouldn't stay in one place for very long. I don't think it's safe." Fellwinter stared at the ground, then finally looked up at the drone. "How will I sleep?" "You don't need to." "But I want to." "That's fine." The name. 6 months of running taught Fellwinter 2 lessons about life. The first lesson was this: anything could happen at any time without explanation or reason. The second lesson was this: it didn't matter how unfair something seemed. Recognition of injustice could not create a just world. There were other lessons too, though those were more tactical. Never rest in the same place twice, and don't rest at all if you can help it. Never cross an open field if a less exposed route exists. Beware of meteor showers. Look out for organic enemies, but don't waste your time avoiding them. They aren't the real threat. That night, Fellwinter and the drone sheltered together in the loft of an old barn. A vicious rainstorm outside impaired visibility enough to justify an overnight. But Fellwinter couldn't stop himself from thinking, from assessing. Flimsy building. Big, empty field. Low attack readiness in this loft. Flimsy building. Big, empty field. Low attack readiness. And still, no matter what the drone said, that he didn't need to sleep, he felt an inexplicable exhaustion. He couldn't locate it precisely. It permeated all of him. The drone noticed. It never said anything, but Fellwinter knew it noticed. He rested his head on his knees. Beside him, the drone hovered at his shoulder, drifting away occasionally to assess the weather through a glassless window. Eventually, Fellwinter raised his head. "What's your name?" he asked the drone quietly. "What?" "Your name," he said. "You gave me one. What's yours?" "I haven't thought about it." Silence fell between them again. They lived in silence. But in recent days the silence had changed. If before it was the silence of strangers, now it had become the silence of a team, where each member knew their job and what was at stake if they didn't perform. The lights of Fellwinter's eyes narrowed briefly into lines as he thought, he glanced at the drone. "Spring." "What?" the drone said. "Fell Spring," Fellwinter said. "That's your name." They stared at each other. "Are you serious?" the drone said. "Fell Spring." Fellwinter gazed past her. Silence again. "Fine," said Fellspring. The Assailant. After 3 weeks without any incidents, Fellwinter and Fellspring stopped avoiding main roads. They started passing by other travelling parties, even a small camp. They never engaged, until an exo-Risen asked to tag along with them on his way to a place called Red Valley. Neither Fellwinter nor Fellspring liked the idea, but they both reluctantly accepted it, with an unspoken agreement between them that it shouldn't last. "Nice day, isn't it?" said Griffin 11. He looked up at the blue sky and opened his arms. Good travelling weather. Lucky. Felwinter and Felspring exchanged a look, then focused on the road ahead again. Griffin looked at Felwinter, hoisting his pack up on his shoulder. Where are you headed anyway? You never said. Felwinter took a beat too long to say, Not sure. This stumped Griffin. Inexplicably, Felwinter thought. Huh? He said. Just walking? You could come with us, said Griffin's ghost. She wore a green and yellow shell with flower-like petals. No, said Felspring. And then, remembering the world of polite conversation, she added, We're going somewhere. We just don't know the name. Griffin and his ghost absorbed that information, nodding. An adventure, Griffin said finally with a grin in his voice. Right? This whole world is an adventure, isn't it? And we get 1,000 chances to live it. Felwinter said nothing. He felt uneasy. He rarely spoke, but when he did, he never sounded like Griffin did. His voice never sounded like that. He never even had the impulse to talk that way. Why? They walked on, passing through a string of abandoned factories. There was evidence of the fallen everywhere, but it looked old. Ripped up banners, trampled in the mud. A walker stripped of most of its parts. Griffin loosed his gun from its holster, casually, but didn't break his step. Gunfire stuttered out from an open doorway. A bullet clanged off of Felwinter's shoulder like a clapper off a bell. Arming his rifle, he returned fire in the direction the shots had come. He should have known this was a bad spot. Low visibility. A lot of corners. Squat buildings they couldn't see inside of. Hundreds of rusted shipping containers to hide in. The doorway was a decoy. 10, 20, 30 armed and armoured combat frames with glowing red eyes spilled out of warehouses to their left and right. Moving with discipline and eerie synchrony, the frames began a pincer manoeuvre, trying to pin them down. Griffin swore. We have to get to cover, Felwinter said. Fighting back to back, rezzing each other when they died, Felwinter and Griffin took down some 15 frames with gunfire alone, and a few more with grenades. Several got back up despite crippling damage, tottering forward on bent and broken legs, relentless, single-minded. They drew inexorably closer as the two Exos ran down their ammunition and energy. It was Griffin who saved them in the end, with 3 bolts of arc light that erupted out of his hands. As the frames closest to them disintegrated in a shower of blue light, Griffin whooped and said breathlessly, I've never done that before. Felwinter went to examine one of the mostly intact frames. Damn, he blurted. Do you know what these are? No, Felwinter said. Not Exos. Felspring zipped in between them. She scanned the frame, bathing it in blue light. She hesitated, and then offered. Rasputin? I think so, Griffin's ghost agreed. See this logo? She indicated a symbol on the frame's chassis that looked a little like a military badge. Matches my database. Yeah, said Griffin. He looked at Felwinter. What did you do to get a war mind on your case? Felwinter stared down at the frame. What's a war mind? The bunker. I can get it open, Felspring said, as Felwinter pried open 2 rusted metal doors with his hands. You don't have to do that. The metal screamed as Felwinter ripped the 2 doors back. They were deep underground, in a bunker Felspring had struggled for 6 days to locate. Now that they'd found it, Felwinter realised he didn't know what they were looking for. I don't know very much about Rasputin, Felspring said, floating cautiously beside him. I thought he was deactivated, or destroyed, in the collapse. Felwinter walked forward. The room was like a time capsule, untouched, preserved, as if technicians might walk in at any time to work the control panels lining the walls. It reminded him of the library where he'd woken up, just in its complexity and maybe its beauty. Was this beautiful? He wasn't sure.
So why would a war mind be after us?
Felwinter muttered. Felspring hovered to examine a flat, black surface on one of the control panels. I don't know. Felwinter came up beside her. He hesitated, and then reached to touch the shiny black surface of the panel. It blinked to life under his hand, bright code and controls glowing orange, rearranging themselves as he dragged his finger across them. How did you do that? Felspring whispered. Felwinter shook his head. He touched another blank panel, and lights came on all over the bunker, waking it up.
I don't know,
he said. The Mountain. Warsats and combat frames found Felwinter and Felspring everywhere they went. They weighed the pros and cons and decided that a fortified home base was safer than picking a new, ramshackle camp every time they wanted to rest. It was risky, but so was everything. So Felwinter climbed a mountain. At the top of it was a pre-Golden Age observatory they'd found in a map database in a Seraph bunker. It was the perfect place to hide. It had a 360-degree view of the surrounding area, existing structures that could be fortified, a mountain they could burrow into to hide themselves beneath thousands of tons of rock. He won't find you up here, Felspring said. Or, at the very least, you'll see him coming. She sounded almost hopeful. Maybe we could finally stop running. Felwinter looked warily at the sky and said nothing. The only problem with the mountain was that it was occupied. A warlord named Castor had claimed it and the village at the mountain's base. But Felwinter knew that everyone had a price, and he called on Castor to negotiate. Warlords, he'd learned, were poor negotiators. They were almost never willing to give ground. In the end, Felwinter shot Castor's ghost and pushed him off the side of the mountain. A month later, during a routine patrol of the mountain's perimeter, Felwinter found a woman sitting on a rock ledge halfway down the mountain. Beside her, there was a wooden crate of sad-looking crops, and another, heavy with ammunition. She stood up when he arrived. Felwinter exchanged a look with Felspring, then asked the woman, "Who are you?" "My name's Arti," she said. "You killed Lord Castor, didn't you?"
"Yes."
"So you're the lord of this mountain now?"
"It's my mountain,"
Felwinter said.
"But I'm no warlord."
Arti studied him. She had a thin, weathered face and calculating brown eyes. "My village is down there." She pointed down the mountain. "We need protection." That was Castor. "Now it's you." She pointed to the crates, as if she were explaining something to a very simple child. "This is our payment." Felwinter looked at her, then at the crates, and said again, slowly,
"I'm no warlord, and I don't need your food."
Artie's expression was as blank and unreadable as his own. "I'll be back next month." The Warlord. True to her promise, Artie came back the next month with 2 more crates. This time, both were ammunition. She sat next to them, hugging her knees for warmth and looking out at the valley below until Felwinter came by to retrieve it. "I thought this might be more useful to you," she said, "since you don't want food." Felwinter looked at her, took the crates, and then went back up the mountain. The month after that, she brought salvaged weapon parts. When Felwinter came to retrieve them, she watched him until he turned to go, and then said, I know about you, you know. When he turned around to look at her, she lifted her chin. They call you Lord Fellwinter. I hear you've killed more warlords than Castor, over old technology, from the time before the collapse.
Not a warlord,
Fellwinter murmured, hiking onward. Artie watched him, then called to his back. Just because you say that doesn't make it true. She came back the next month, and the next month, and the next. They spoke a little more every time, about life in the village, about what they imagined the time before the collapse was like, about the future. The 7th time he saw her, he lingered a little while. Together, they looked out over the valley, beyond the mountain. You could really help us, Artie said softly. All those Golden Age technologies you know so much about. We could live a totally different life. Fellwinter stood completely still, looking out over the horizon.
I can't,
he said. She looked at him, trying to read his expression, then looked sharply away. They stood in silence for a while. You know, she said, pointing down the mountain, warlords have been crashing through our village for ages, stepping on us, tearing up everything we plant, tearing down everything we build.
I'm not a warlord,
Fellwinter said quietly. Sure, she said, but you're like them. You get 1,000 second chances. You get to live in a big fortress on top of a mountain. What do you think it's like for us? What do you think it's like to have the sky constantly falling down on you? Fellwinter stared at her. Artie crossed her arms. It must be nice, she said. Her expression softened. Not for him, but for herself. For her people. To not have to worry. The next month, Artie didn't come to meet him, nor the month after that. The search. Don't understand what you hope to get out of this, Fellspring said stiffly as Fellwinter searched a Seraph bunker. Golden Age weapons of every shape and size lined the walls. Some of them were clearly non-functional from age and disuse. Others looked pristine, save for the dust. If anything, she went on, you're just putting us back on his radar. When we stayed on the mountain, he stopped bothering us. When Fellwinter didn't reply, Fellspring bunched her shell and asked, more pointedly, is this really because of what she said? Fellwinter picked up one of the weapons, a massive grenade launcher. Who? Fellspring did an incredulous spin. Who? She said mockingly. Who? Fellwinter glanced at her, then back at the grenade launcher. He held it up as if he were aiming it at the wall, and then set it aside and went to pick up a scout rifle, examining its scope. For a while, Fellspring just watched him. Eventually, she flew to his side again and said, this isn't what they need, you know. When he paused to look at her, she went on. Weapons. There's enough of that out there already. His expression remained uncomprehending, and Fellspring sighed. The Golden Age was a time of peace and prosperity.
Right,
Fellwinter said. They built things. They didn't tear them down. At his continued silence, Fellspring floated around to his other side. Think about it. It was the greatest expansion in humanity's history. Cities sprung up like weeds. Impressive cities. And it all happened really fast. She paused. Huh. Actually, I have no idea how they did that. Fellwinter stared at the scout rifle in his hands.
Labour frames?
Sure. But even that wouldn't have been enough. It wouldn't have helped them terraform Titan on their own. They must have had some kind of tech. Something to help them build. Fellwinter nodded and set down the scout rifle.
So, where is that technology?
Bellspring floated over to one of the computer terminals, inspecting the glowing controls. That's what I'm wondering too. SIDDHARTHA GOLEM. Amygdala votive grasp. AICOM Rasputin. Assets Golem. Interrogative. Immediate action order. This is a subtle asset imperative. No human review. No AICOM review. Secure. Autark. Initiate SIDDHARTHA Golem upload at DSC 342 to assess integrity of moral structures. Stand by for criteria. Under Passage, Obsolesce, Sidereal, if Nanobase Sonda is Ivory, if Hammurabi is active and passes human review under context Turing, if Duryodhana is in failure and passes AICOM review under context IDES, set Spectrum certification to Smaragdine. Else, stand by for contingent action order. Set Spectrum certification to Amaranthine. Initiate human review unless tactical morality is built at midnight. Experience is the teacher of all things. Stop, stop, stop. Coronary Mirror Sheath. AICOM Rasputin. Assets ForceCon Imperative. Immediate action order. SIDDHARTHA Golem detected in sector OR41S. Reactivation conditions unknown. SIDDHARTHA Golem identified with O energy signature. Automated remote asset seizure failed. Automated remote injection of wetware payload Helminth failed. Automated remote injection of hardware payload Catacomb failed. I am invoking Absalom Knife. Upon execution, all affected assets resume long hold at midnight exigent. And weep the more, because I weep in vain. Stop, stop, stop. The Discovery. For weeks, Fellwinter and Fellspring searched out Seraph bunkers, trying to find remnants of the technology that built a Golden Age utopia. One night, they camped in a Seraph bunker and spent hours poring over transcripts of old code. "This is weird," Fellspring said, and projected a display of a long string of code. "Look, in the Golden Age, Rasputin executes a protocol called SIDDHARTHA Golem. No idea what it is. Some kind of knowledge gathering? It gathers a bunch of transcripts, conversations with humans, recordings of music, a huge database of literature." She whirred, and the projection flipped through thousands of words of code, then stopped again. "Here. Early Dark Age. A submind in old Russia says SIDDHARTHA Golem is active and gone rogue." Her voice dropped. "Around the time I found you." Fellwinter studied the code. It was almost like sight reading. Not quite effortless, but like a native tongue he'd forgotten. "But what is SIDDHARTHA Golem?" he murmured. Fellspring zipped back and forth through the code again at a nervous, stuttering pace, then stopped it. Then scrolled through the code again, stopped, scrolled again, stopped. "Wait," her voice quivered just a little. "See that? This is the first time SIDDHARTHA Golem is mentioned. It..." She paused, then went on, quieter. "It says, initiate SIDDHARTHA Golem upload at DSC 342. A beat. DSC. Fellwinter. Fellwinter was silent, thinking, uncomprehending. "DSC?" he asked quietly. deep stone crypt. She was almost whispering now. SIDDHARTHA Golem was an exo. Felwinter looked down at himself, at his hands. He turned them over, studying the worn metal of his palms. The silence filled the bunker nearly to bursting. To Felwinter, it felt like years until either of them spoke again. The whole time, Felspring watched him, frozen in the air. "He's you," she whispered. The Iron Lord. "He wants to join us," Timur said to Radagast. Felwinter stood next to him, silent, unreadable. Unlike other exos Radagast had seen, he didn't seem to have any emotion mods beyond the factory setting defaults. It was unnerving. Radagast tipped his chin to Felwinter. "Timur says you have an interest in the Golden Age." "In the War Mind," Timur said. "Rasputin." Felwinter said nothing. "What brought you to us?" Radagast asked. Felwinter glanced at Timur, and then back at Radagast.
"Your friend here told me about the nanotech you're looking for. Siva?" He paused. "It sounds too good to be true, but I want to help you find it."
Radagast studied him, and then finally nodded. "Any civilians on your mountain?"
"A little settlement at the bottom."
"We think the mountain would make a good place for our base of operations."
"Funny,"
Felwinter said without any trace of humour.
"I said the same thing to myself years ago."
Radagast snorted. "So, would you give up the peak for the cause?"
"If I do my people get the protection of the Iron Lords?"
Timur slapped Felwinter on the back, a giant hand hitting an immovable object. And Radagast smiled, just a little. "Let me take you to Saladin," he said. "He'll tell you about the city." The Lure. Felwinter and Felspring did most of their searching alone. It was easier that way. Better that the others didn't see how the Seraph bunkers reacted to him. Better for everyone. In a bunker on the outskirts of the Cosmodrome in Old Russia, Felwinter browsed through maps of old, deactivated Golden Age facilities, looking for anywhere that might have housed Siva, or Siva-related research. At the same time, Felspring decrypted and searched old command records for signs of Siva. By now, they moved like clockwork. It was almost unconscious.
"Hey,"
Felwinter said.
"Got anything on Site 6?
"Give me the coordinates," Felspring said. "I'll look." After a moment, she displayed a section of code for Felwinter to see. "Research Center," she said. There was a note of hope in her voice. "Containment facility for something called Amphion Lyre? Do you think?"
"I feel pretty damn sure,"
Felwinter said quietly. They looked at the screen of the console, where a little red light blinked on a map next to the words, Site 6.
"Come on,"
Felwinter said.
"We have to tell the others."
He committed the map to memory and turned to go, but Felspring zipped in front of him. "Wait," she said. "Wait a second. Wasn't that kind of too easy?" Felwinter looked around.
"We've been here for hours," he said, "and we've been searching for years."
"Sure," Felspring said, "but not as long as it took to find SIDDHARTHA Golem. Not as long as it took to get away from him. Compared to all that, this was too good to be true." Felwinter said nothing, and she went on, close to pleading. "After everything, why would he do this? Why would he just drop this in your lap?"
"He didn't," Felwinter said. "We found it."
Felspring didn't scare easily, but she sounded scared. "He let us find it, Felwinter. I'm almost positive." Felwinter shook his head.
No, we found it.
He looked at his ghost.
If anybody can get Rasputin to cooperate with the Iron Lord, it's us. We know him better than anyone.
He paused.
I know him better than anyone.
He lowered his voice.
This is it, Felspring. This could change everything.
The little red dot on the map blinked steadily, like a beacon. They were still as they looked at each other, waiting. There was no real disagreement here. After all these years together, her doubts were his doubts, and his certainty was her certainty, whether they liked it or not. Sometimes I wish we'd just stayed on that mountain, Felspring said finally. Alone.
Me too,
said Felwinter, turning for the door.
But we didn't.
The mistake. Site 6 is locked down, Lord Saladin said. We have no idea what kind of security measures are in place. He leaned back in his seat at the grand wooden table in the Iron Temple. Golden Age tech is durable. We might be walking into a trap set centuries ago. Felwinter stood nearby, arms crossed.
I've infiltrated Golden Age facilities before. Hasn't been a problem.
The mortar is barely dried in our city walls, Saladin said. We've driven the warlords back, but they are watching. This may not be the time for risk. Leaning with his elbow on the table, Timur looked between them. Besides, what about the war mind? My understanding is that Siva is under its protection. Perhaps it won't take kindly to thieves.
We're not stealing anything,
Felwinter said.
And I think I can communicate with Rasputin.
It's a computer, Lady Jolder said. It'll do what it's programmed to do, no matter how clever your arguments are.
Rasputin's primary directive is to protect humanity. He'll listen.
Timo said, smiling a little. So personal. Felwinter looked at him, and then back at Saladin.
With Siva, we could build more cities. We could help more people.
Passion wasn't his strong suit, but he felt it now. More than he ever had before.
We could create a new Golden Age.
He's right, Scory said. We need a new way to give back. She looked between her companions. When you go to replant a forest, you don't stop after 1 or 2 saplings. The Iron Lords fell quiet. Jolder was frowning, but frowning meant thinking. Silmar looked worried. Radagast and Timo were on his side, Felwinter knew. But the Iron Lords never did anything without consensus. The Golden Age isn't coming back, Saladin said finally. But you're right. Siva could change the lives of the people in the city. He leaned forward. It feels like a worthy risk. The others murmured among themselves, considering. Perun spoke above the chatter. Well, why not? We don't want people thinking the Iron Lords have retired, after all.